he is good. For he is good. Give thanks to the Lord. For he is good. For he is good. Give thanks to the Lord. For he is good. For he is good. His love endures forever.
His love will reign
forevermore.
His power will reign
forevermore.
His grace will reign
forevermore.
His peace will reign
forevermore.
His love will reign
forevermore.
His power will reign
forevermore.
His
love endures forever.
Today we're going to have a look at the concept of moral law and how morality demands a moral lawgiver. Of course, we're in the middle of a series of, I call them demands, if you like, each one has the word demand in there. And Quentin showed us a couple of weeks ago about how life demands a life giver. And Hao Shen was talking about how design demands a designer. And in very much the same kind of theme and style, we're going to have a look at how morality demands a moral lawgiver. So to all those who are members or visitors here today, or those who are streaming online, let's have a look what the Bible has to say, or what logic has to say really, about this concept of morality. If I was to try and maybe put a top 3 priority list of what people in general would want in life, maybe it'll be these 3. To live a long life, to love or be loved, and to leave a legacy. Now, the question I ask you is, okay, you might have some different priorities in life, or maybe a couple extra you want to add there, or maybe you want to take one away. I'm not sure how your situation is, but if you think of your top 3 priorities in life, what is it that you will do to attain or retain those priorities? What is it that you would do? Would you betray? Would you torture? Would you abuse? Would you destroy? Would you kill? Maybe there's a few other stronger things that you would do to attain these things. What is it that you would do to attain them? I suppose in reality, it doesn't matter how important our priorities are. Surely there's something in your life that you will not do. A line that you will draw somewhere, something you won't do to attain those things. All right, let's have a look at the animals. See, maybe they're a little different to the way we are as humans. What are the important things in the life of an animal? Perhaps they're a little bit slightly different to what ours are, our priorities, because we are different. Perhaps it is to procreate. I don't know how far up that is in their list. And to survive as a creature, and also to survive as a collective species. Now let's ask the same question. What would animals do to attain or retain these priorities in their life? What would they do? Here's a list of a few things that I've noticed and read about in nature that's very, very interesting and very, very, wow. I think it's quite well some of the things that we see and notice in nature and the way it operates. Predators tend to hunt the weak and vulnerable. That's their preference because they're easier to catch, obviously, and prey on. What else have we got? Heard about the turtle that, I think it's a leatherback turtle, any turtle really, that goes and it, oh sorry, I haven't turned it on. There we go. Can you hear? All right, sorry, I was using that speaker anyway. We talk about a turtle. It lays all of its eggs. I don't know how many eggs it lays, probably hundreds of legs in a particular place on the shore. And what does it do? It just abandons them. Leaves, it goes away, and it leaves those eggs to hatch by themselves, to get out of the ground by themselves, to find its way to the sea, and, well, to survive the rest of its life. Interesting. We heard about how whales sometimes just commit mass suicide. We have a look at how they just find them all beached up as far as the eye can see, and you try to put them back into the ocean, and many of them just swim back again. Mass suicides. Interesting behavior. Monitor lizards are here as part of their normal, everyday diet, will eat their young. This is not a very romantic example here, but you have male spiders and female spiders, certain species, after they procreate, well, the female just eats the male, done. Not very romantic at all. You get various creatures, predators like foxes, leopards as well. They seem to have this idea that they want to kill a whole lot of things, and they do this surplus, needless killing, and they only eat like a small portion of what they actually killed, and the rest get wasted, really. Chickens themselves will turn on and peck the weak of their own kind until they did. These are things that we see in nature. Maybe some of you haven't even heard of some of these unusual things that they do, but this is what happens in nature, and in some way they've decided that this is what's necessary to be done in order to survive, in order to attain and retain those three top priorities in their existence. Very different. Humans are unique in the sense that, from what I've had a look at here alone, they are unique and very different to animals in the way that they view survival, the things that they're prepared to do to survive. Humans have some kind of a code of conduct that they have. As they go through life, they are run and ruled by this code of conduct. And it's not seen in any other creature in creation. It's kind of like an instinctive response to the situations they find themselves in, hostile situations, good situations. These are the kind of default instinctive responses that they have in these situations. And some actions are just morally unacceptable to mankind. And this is it's hard to describe this moral law. It's not really something that's physical. It's not really something that you can see in the air. It's a moral law that's not perceived by the senses. We can't really explain what it looks like. It's not physical. And the word that we could perhaps use to describe this law is, it's a metaphysical law. It's not a physical law, and it governs mankind in this very unique way. We call it a moral code. Might have another name for it, another way to describe it. I call it a moral code. All right, so we have a couple of questions. When we see this difference between ourselves and animals, we have these questions that we want to ask to explain these things. Why does mankind have this moral code? Other questions may be, when did mankind get this code? When was it instilled in them? How did mankind become governed by this code? Why do other creatures not have this moral code? That's probably one of the bigger questions, if you like. Why are we so different? We know we're special, but why are we so different from the animals? The fact that we have questions that we want to know answers to is again another thing that makes us unique. It's not just the moral laws that we have, but it's all the questions that we ask pertaining to that, adjacent to that. That also makes us unique. A lot of questions, and perhaps as we go throughout today, we'll have a look at some of the answers, some of the perspectives that we can see that kind of like explain or shed light to these things. This is what atheists and evolutionists have to say. Even the atheists believe that mankind has object moral values, and they are different from all other creatures because no other creature displays this kind of behavior. Yet, of course, the evolutionists will believe that we somehow are descendant or have evolved from this primordial slime or the mineral rocks. I'm not sure what the latest theory is that we have. But if we were How did we get these moral values? Did they come along? Were they inherent or built into the minerals that we are made up of, or the slime? How did this get to us? How did these moral values transfer to us? They cannot explain that concept. But the point is that they do understand and they do admit to the idea that man has object moral values. But the reality is, if we want to face up to it, and if we want all the answers, and if we want to search this avenue of thought, we're going to come to the conclusion that morality demands that there's a moral lawgiver. All right, so perhaps if we look at where it all began, and we have a look at the scriptures to try and explain why are we different to the animals? Was there something different about the way we were created? Is there something that's happened that's different, that's resulted in this outcome of us being different to the animals? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at what Genesis has to say. That's where it all began. Let's see if it can give us some answers. Genesis 2 verse 7, it talks about how man was created from the ground. Does that make him different from the animals? Of course not. Genesis 2:19 talks about how the animals were created in the same way. All right, let's have a look further on. Genesis 1:28, man is given the ability to procreate. Doesn't make us different either, because the animals were given the same ability. But that's about where it ends, the similarity. If we're looking at the creation story, that's where that similarity begins. Let's go and have a look at the differences. The scriptures talk about, and Quinton was touching on it in the Lord's Supper, about breathing life and making things alive. God's breath was breathed into the nostrils of man, and that's how he came into being. Although the scriptures don't talk about animals being brought into being in the same way. We have a look at Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27. We were made in the image of God. That's how we were created. Doesn't say anything like that about the animals. Perhaps somewhere in those differences that we've had a look at, made in the image of God, having breath in us, perhaps somewhere in those differences is some kind of explanation as to why we're different from the animals. All right, so how did man gain these moral values? How did it all begin? Genesis 1 verse 27 talks about how God, and throughout Genesis 1 and 2 it talks about how God taught mankind so many different things, and the first one that he taught them was, the first responsibility that he gave them was the responsibility of being in dominion over the animals, to rule over them, to rule over creation, to respect creation, to be responsible in the way that they do that. They were given responsibilities. Genesis 2 verse 16 to 17 says, man learnt about boundaries. Isn't that what God said? You can eat of any tree that you find in the garden. That one over there, in the middle of the garden, that's off limits. Those are the boundaries that are set for you. Man learnt about these boundaries. Then, of course, what happened was inevitable, wasn't it? Mankind crossed those boundaries. And so he learnt about something else. He learnt about guilt. He learnt about shame. And he felt exposed and naked in the garden. That's what Genesis 3 verse 6 talks about. Then he also learnt about the very harsh reality that there is a penalty for things that you do that are wrong. There is a penalty, and he was expelled from the Garden of Eden. And that we see in Genesis chapter 3. He learnt about penalty. But of course, God being the forgiving entity that he is, he taught them about atonement. And we see in Genesis 4 verse 4 the concept of sacrificing an animal to attempt to appease and atone for your sins. He's learnt a lot just in the first few years of his life, and God has taught him these things. But does that mean our moral values that we have, like looking at the story in the Garden of Eden, does that mean the moral values that we have been taught to us? Is that what it means? All right. You may also have questions that says, all right, if moral values can only be learnt and taught to us, does that mean that only those who've had the opportunity to be able to be taught will have moral values? Is that what it means? Another question people might ask is, are there different sets of moral values, moral codes? Are there different sets, depending on who was the one that taught them to you? Is the idea of what is right or what is wrong, is that subjective, just dependent on the person? Or another one, do we have different motives behind the good things or the bad things that we do? It's one thing to do something that's right, but it's another thing to have the wrong motive behind it. Let's have a look and see if we can answer those questions. Now, of course, these are very meaningful questions, and they are questions that are real. They are questions that people ask in everyday life when they come into contact with this concept of a moral code. But now you don't go and look in the library and find a book or a textbook that explains all the intricacies and ins and outs of morality and learn from this book as if it's like a tutor teaching us everything that we need to know about moral values. Of course not. We need to go to the sources that we do have that describe morality, what it is, how do we deal with it. And we'll have a look in the scriptures about various things that we can analyze in some of the scriptures that shed light and give us a bit of an understanding on this moral conflict, this morality that exists. What I want to suggest is that God himself has taught us these moral values. Okay, we've seen that in Genesis chapter 2. What I'd also like to suggest is that it's more than just something that's been taught to us. It's something instinctive. It's something encoded into our very being. A lot of things come in the form of instinct, and perhaps this is one of these instinctive things. We're not talking about physical, we're talking about instinctive, which isn't physical, it's metaphysical. And this form of instinct that we have allows us to access these moral values as we go throughout life. So are moral values nature or nurture? You've all heard about the nature-nurture concept. It's a concept that says something is inherently as it is by nature, or by nurture something is not there present at first, but then is taught to us. So, are moral values by nature or nurture, or both? So let's expand on this idea. Now, in order to do this, I have a story. I was hoping to have an illustration here of a nest of a weaver bird. I don't know if you ever heard of a weaver bird, until I realized I don't think you have them in this country anyway. So we'll have to do with a picture. A weaver bird is a colony type bird that builds its nest in these huge trees, and there's a whole colony of them building their nests in different places. And it has a very unique skill in the way it builds its nest that sets it apart from other birds and the nests that they make. It is very skillfully made from the materials that are available, long blades of grass, and it's woven in and out, and it's created in a very strong, durable, functional way. Now, this is the male weaver bird that does this, and it has this wonderful instinct and skill to make not only the nest, but one of the parts of the nest, I don't think you'll see it here, it's near the top. One of the parts of the nest is like a false entrance. And this false entrance is exactly where the predators go. They want to feast on the eggs that are on the nest. And it goes in this false entrance, and that doesn't lead anywhere. And of course they abandon, the predator leaves it and says, well, this is too much hard work, I can't get in here, and he leaves it. It's a wonderful skill and instinct that this weaver bird has to build these nests. And they even did an experiment many years ago where they got eggs, weaver bird eggs, and they isolated them away from their parents. The idea behind that is so that they can't be taught how to build nests. And the eggs hatched, and lo and behold, they still had that instinct to be able to build their nests, even though they were not exposed to the teachings of their parents. They still had that instinct and that ability. Granted, those nests weren't very well made, but they were instinctively basically the same shape. And that's, of course, where the parents of the weaver bird comes in, They're the ones who kind of like finish off those skills that they inherently have, and they allow them to make those nests pretty much perfectly. But that's the male weaver bird. Now, the female weaver bird is another wonderful skill. If you can call it wonderful, I'll explain what it is. She has this ability and this inbuilt skill in her to assess this nest, because when a nest is made for her by the male, it's his proposition to her, right? And she gets this nest, she has a look at it. If she likes it, if she says it's strong enough, yeah, I think this can hold my weight, I think it's right, the eggs won't fall through or whatever it is, and she assesses that and she says it's good, then of course, all good, the courtship begins. But if it's not good, the female weaver bird has this ability to just, in front of the male, rip up the nest and rip it apart, throw it to the ground. That's what it does. The male and the female have this instinct encoded into them to deal with nest building and courtship and all those various related disciplines. Let's have a look at another example. I've got a couple of cats, and they're adorable little creatures. Very domesticated, of course, you know how pets are. But if I was to, in a scenario, return them back to the wild, maybe if they were very old, they'd not really be able to get back into the wild again, they'd probably die. But one of two things would happen. They would either die, or they would go back to being wild again, and feral. I think the word we use is feral. They'd go back to being feral again in order to survive that new environment, getting chucked out the house and thrown into the wilds. It's because it has an instinct that sometimes we suppress. When we domesticate an animal, we suppress that instinct. But then when that is undone, we send them back into the wild, that instinct resurfaces again because it's hard-coded into its being. Let's have a look at mankind today. Perhaps mankind's moral ability to discern morality, what's right from wrong, is something instinctive and inbuilt into them. And that's what we would call moral laws today, something an instinctive response in determining or sorting out issues of what is right and what is wrong. But of course, you might ask the question, this is a good question, if mankind instinctively knows what's right and wrong, why does he keep on doing wicked things? Why? And we saw that from the scripture that Shane was reading, there's that moral dilemma. Why does he do bad things? Because, well, there's another side to man, isn't there? And we'll have a look at that and we'll see why there's this contrast. Why he wants to do this but doesn't, but ends up doing this. We'll have a look at that later on. But it's a good question. Why does mankind act in that way, do wicked things? Another question. If we got all these moral laws, why don't we just automatically, trained as children, just walk into church and say, done? Go through all this hard work of trying to reach people. They must just walk into church now because they've got these moral values, right? Of course, it's not that simple. Mankind is complex. Mankind is different to all the other animals. The Bible itself has, and we'll have a look at these, a few indicators that reflect these morals. And we'll have a look at some of these. It also has an explanation as to why sometimes we suppress those morals that we have. All right, here's the first indicator. 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 2 says this: the Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. Looking at this scripture, something we can notice straight off the bat is that people come from different varying backgrounds, have different levels of wickedness, if we want of a better word. We could be hypocritical liars. We could be people who love to deceive others. It doesn't matter how bad we are. We all begin, this scripture is showing us that we all begin with this conscience. That's what we start off with. And of course, those that pursue wicked are the ones that sear, and the word they use here is to desensitize, if you like, our conscience so that it cannot influence us in our lives. So some have suppressed that conscience to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. But then the scriptures also talk about the other side of the coin. And this is Paul here writing to Timothy. He talks about, I thank God whom I serve as my ancestors did with a clear conscience. As night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers. We begin with a conscience. And if we keep it clear, if we preserve it, if we allow it to work in our lives and we don't push it aside, it is there to help us. So that's the first indicator that we have moral values, is that we have a conscience. That's the first indicator. Second one, Matthew 7 verse 12 says this: so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. There's an interesting ability that we have, an interesting indicator that shows that we understand that we have moral values because of our ability to reason. So if I'm looking at something seen or something horrible playing out over there, and I say to myself, wow, whatever it is that's happening, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. No way would I want that to happen to me. And by extension, by knowing that and by realizing that, by just looking, our logic says to them, well, if I don't want that to happen to me, I wouldn't want that to happen to anybody else, right? It's our ability that we have to project, to put ourselves in the shoes of others and have a look and see how people are impacted by the things that are going on around them, and say to ourselves, well, logic tells me that that's not right because I don't want the same thing happening to me. We sometimes use our logic by being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, by being able to empathize with other people. We show another indicator that we understand what moral values are, and we understand the importance of them. We have that ability to focus away from our own selfish lives. Isn't that what we tend to want to do as physical, selfish beings? We want to focus on our own survival. We want to focus on ourselves. But no, mankind has that ability to put themselves in other people's shoes and to consider the impact to others and therefore gauge what is right and what is wrong. So logical reasoning is that another indicator that we have moral values. Oh, now do I have to go through this whole? There we go. John chapter 3, verse 17 to 21 says this: for God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but so that the world might be saved through him. The one who believes in him is not judged. The one who does not believe has been judged already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is my judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light, so that his deeds will not be exposed. But the one who practices the truth comes to the light, so that his deeds will be revealed as having been performed in God. When we have a look at this passage of Scripture, perhaps we break that kind of mold that we think in when we think of what it's going to be like at judgment time, right? You know, we have this kind of like this courtroom scene all played out where we come to the pearly gates. They call it the pearly gates. And then there's this like courtroom in place here, and Jesus is the judge. And then we're there and we're defending ourselves for our very lives. And we get our chance to say our say. And perhaps we even think if we've led bad lives, we think, oh, maybe we will be able to get some kind of loophole in the law maybe. And then we go the way we want to go. That's not how it works. That's not how it plays out when we come to the judgment. Because when we come to the judgment, we're separated from our physical selves. We're separated from that part of us that has those evil thoughts. And so there's a new reality that comes to mind. We get into what we call self-judgment mode. And the scriptures here talk about when we're in that situation of judgment, we will know whether we're in the right or whether we're in the wrong. And if we're in the right, we will go to where God has a place reserved for us. But if we're in the wrong, we know it and we can see it. And we judge ourselves and we say, right, no, I don't want to go there. I know I don't belong there. And so this ability to self-judge is that mankind's deep-seated ability to realize when they're in the wrong. That is another indicator that we have moral values, because we know we have moral values. And when the chips are down and when we get into this kind of situation of non-return, where we're before the judgment seat, we will know these things. Then, of course, Shane read this one for us, and rather him reading it than I. Very, very difficult passage to read, a bit of a tongue twister, and it all explains that internal conflict that we have. Isn't there this internal conflict that we have? I don't even know if I want to read it again, because I'll probably make a couple of mistakes, but I have underlined verse 19 there. It talks about, for the good that I want, I do not do, but I practice the very evil that I do not want. There's this conflict that goes on within us, because as the scriptures is explaining here, there are two parts to us, right? There's the physical part and there's the metaphysical part. Sorry, you shouldn't use the word metaphysical. Metaphysical is a term that atheists use to describe what is not physical. What they mean is spiritual, right? There's a physical part and there's a spiritual part to us. And it's very clear here that it is the physical part, that side of it, that doesn't understand moral values, doesn't have a clue. But that spiritual part of us, that's the part that is encoded with these moral values. And so there's this conflict. The physical part has no problem doing wicked. But the spiritual part is the one where we have the intent to do good and know what good is. And it's in conflict. And that's the fourth indicator of how we know that we have moral values and we know that we have to deal with them, is the fact that there's that internal conflict within us. So what now? The signs are all there. We read these scriptures, we have a look, and there's clearly an indicator that we have moral values. And we need to adhere to those moral values. Those signs are all there. So what is it that we do about it? If you're not a Christian, what is it that you do about this? You have this idea, you know in your mind, there are moral values. I know they are there. I can't close my eyes and ignore them. They're there. What do I do about it? Is there something more that I need to do? Step one. You've already completed step one. Accept that there's a moral code. First step done, completed. What now? We can ponder why we have these moral values. Okay, we're getting somewhere now. We're building on from that original acceptance. We're pondering, okay, why is it that we have these moral values? I notice I'm different to the animals. Why do I have these things? How did I get them? These are all good questions. And we realize it is a way more than just something that we learnt. Because we know sometimes we have an instinct to do something and we know for sure. Nobody taught us that. But we have this instinct. It's way more than just something that we learnt. It's something that predates that. Step 5. We come to the conclusion there has to be one who designed us and gave us this moral code. So in a way, there's kind of like an extension on what Harshen was talking about, the idea of a design. He was talking more about the physical intricacies and designs that we have. This is like an extension to that. We're designed to have moral values in a spiritual sense. Now what I want to have a look at here, and running out of time, what I want to have a look at here is a couple of cases, I've got 3 here, where typical everyday people have come to this conclusion, I know I have moral values. And they deal with them in different ways. Let's see if you can relate to some of them. Many a wicked person has reflected on their immoral lives and said that they are not interested in becoming a Christian because my sins are too great for God to forgive. When I hear that, that sounds very tragic to me, that there are people that think that. My sins are too great. I've done too many. I've looked back in my life. I've looked back at the past reflections, and I've had a look at everything I've done that's been good, but not so much good, so much evil and wicked. There's no way. There's no way God can forgive me. But this tells us something about ourselves when we come to this decision, when we say these things. It says that we admit that there's a right and wrong, but it also says something very sad in that we feel that because of the extent of our wickedness, the only way to deal with it is to pay for our mistakes in a very bad way, very final way. Another thing it tells us is that we underestimate the forgiving power of God. Very clearly, many people underestimate God's ability to forgive whatever it is that we've done in our lives. We also underestimate the abilities and the opportunities that we have throughout life. Okay, we've had a bad past, but life carries on, and many more opportunities will present themselves for us to recognize that we have these opportunities to change. It's never too late. 1 John 1 verse 9 says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous, so that he will forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. All unrighteousness. That's what happens to some people in life, and I don't know what the percentages are, but I would imagine a lot of people go through this moral conflict in their lives when looking at their past. Let's have a look at another way in which people deal with moral conflict. Some people come into a crossroad in their lives. So we're talking about the present here. And they take stock of where they are, what they're doing with their lives, what they've accomplished. And they say, what can insignificant little me possibly do to change the fate that lies before me? So it may not be anything they're looking at in their past, but they're just looking at themselves, and they say, I'm just beginning to realize this world is so big. It's so huge. I'm so insignificant. What is it that I can do? It's up to me, right, to change. What is it that I can do to address these moral issues that I have? And of course, it's another tragic misconception that we have, because inherently it means that we think that whatever it is that we need to do, the next step that we need to take, we think that it's a step that only we must take, us alone. No help from anyone. And we seem to think that it's what we have to do to prove our worth to God. Well, let me tell you something, brethren. We cannot prove our worth to God. We are worthless beings. God doesn't give us anything because we have worth. He gives us things because we love Him, because we're prepared to do whatever we need to do. That's why He loves us. That's why we can then take those next steps and carry on. We don't need to prove our worth to God. We need to do things necessary to take us to the next level. But there's no way we can earn our way into heaven, that we'll get enough points. We're never going to make it on our own. It also says that we do not understand the huge role and part that God plays or wants to play in our lives. We think we're on our own. That's what God is there for. He's there to help us through these various steps and responsibilities that we need to take to build on to these moral values that we recognize. We also underestimate just how much help is also available to us from others. And I'm talking about the church here. I'm talking about other groups of people, other people who have been through the same steps, who have been through the same process. We can leverage from their knowledge. We can leverage from their experiences. We don't have to do it all ourselves. Matthew chapter 6 says, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be provided to you." We don't have to provide them all ourselves. Only God can provide most of these things in our lives. Don't think it's just us that needs to do it. Another scenario I've found that a lot of people would fall into this category when they realize moral values and what they need to do. Some people live lives with strict adherence to moral values, but always wonder, what if God does not recognize my efforts, or they don't count for much? They're doing all these things, they're ticking all the boxes, they're doing the right things, but they're not sure, they don't have that feeling, is this going to work? Have I put my investment in the right area? Is this going to pan out well for me? Another tragic misconception that people have. We are sometimes not fully invested in the commitments that we make to adhere to those moral values. We do them because that person told us to do them, or that person told us to do them, or everyone is doing that, oh, we might as well do that. We're not fully invested in our commitments. We have uncertainties in our faith. We don't know if we can rely on God to deliver for us. We don't have that faith in God. We don't have that faith in ourselves. We don't know if we can rely on God. Well, that's not a good way to start, is it? To not know whether you can trust God. We sacrifice so much is another thing that entraps a lot of people. They have a look at their lives, they're conforming to, and the struggles that they go through, and then they compare themselves to other people who are in a totally different situation, who are not Christians, who are living it up in whatever they're doing in life. And we're looking at ourselves, and we're looking at them, and we say, wow, look at the life they're living. Look what I'm doing. You know, mine's just going this way here, and these people are living it up. They're getting a maximum out of life. Hebrews 11 verse 6 says, "And without faith it is impossible to please Him. For the one who comes to God must believe that He exists, and that He proves to be one who rewards those who seek Him." A couple of steps involved here that we need to go through, especially when talking about God and what role He has in our lives. On a personal note, you know, this series is about 4 reasons why I believe in God. From a personal note, what really rang home to me about moral values was not so much about how we get these moral values, or when we get them, or where they get put on us. What really made me think and stop to think about, wow, these moral values are what we need in life, is when I figured out why we have these moral values. and this word, you're not going to find it quoted anywhere. This is a quote from me. A moral code is the breadcrumbs that we need to lead us back to God. I believe that God created us with this moral code so that if we lose our way, or shall rather say when we lose our way, we would have a reminder of these moral codes in the back of our head. I don't know if it's on our left shoulder. Is our morality on the left shoulder and the wicked on the right? I'm not sure. But we have this reminder, this tiny little reminder, and that can serve as breadcrumbs, if you like, that we pick up. And if we pick them up and we trace them back, we can find our way back to the one who gave us that code in the first place. I think of the story of a person who was given up for adoption, if you like, as a child, and they don't remember what their parents looked like. And I don't know what age it's going to be, maybe when they're adults, maybe earlier, they come to this conclusion, why did they give me up? Why have I never seen them? What were their circumstances that led to this result of them giving me up for adoption? And then they want those questions answered. They have that why question. And what they do, they go and, I don't know, you hire a detective, don't you? And you go and find out for them to trace you back to your biological parents, because they have that answer. Well, they have that question in their mind. Why? And that's what I think moral values are. That's why we have them. It's to lead us back to God. And we have the Word, we have the Scriptures that shows us how to do that, how to find our way back to God. Now, I don't know what situation you are in life if you're not a Christian. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what step you're on. I would hope that you've realized we have a moral code. But what you do about that, the answer with what you should do about that, is contained in the Scriptures.
His love.